My creepy neighbour pointed his telescope directly at my bedroom, and the police refused to take it seriously, so I took matters into my own hands. A few months ago, a man moved in across the street from me. On his first day, I noticed he had set up a telescope aimed directly at my bedroom. A few days later, he knocked on my door to introduce himself, and one of the first things he told me was that I was worth going to jail for. My blood ran cold, and the entire interaction was unpleasant. I closed the door on him, but he persisted until I opened it again, warning him not to come inside. He stared at me blankly, then walked away with a smile and without a word. I immediately went back inside and ran up to my bedroom, not at all surprised to see his telescope still pointed at my bedroom. I took a long shower, hoping to clear my mind, but I couldn't settle it. Every sound I heard reminded me of him. The next day I went to the police, thinking surely they would listen to me. Unfortunately, I was reminded that as a woman, sometimes you are not taken seriously, even in situations like these. The officers listened but seemed uninterested. One asked if I was sure I wasn't imagining things, and the other said it wasn't illegal to own a telescope and to come back with actual proof. Apparently his remark was just a distasteful joke in their eyes. I came home defeated. A few days later, things got worse. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed him through the window. His shadowy figure was hunched over the telescope, but his movements were different, more frantic. I realized he was pleasuring himself while watching me. When he noticed I was looking, he didn't stop, he moved faster. Just before I could leave the window, he finished, and I felt sick to my stomach. I went to the bathroom and got sick. I stayed awake all night, realizing this was a nightmare. This man was a psychopath who would terrorize me if someone didn't stop him. I stayed awake until the police stations opened and went back to the police as soon as they did. I explained what I had seen and that my lack of sleep was due to fear. I even told them about my ex, a stalker who kept visiting me at work, leaving notes at my door. I hoped they would understand. However, they told me to move or get better curtains and needed concrete evidence. It was clear I wouldn't get help unless it was too late. I knew I had to do something myself. Weeks passed, and the stranger tried to get closer. When gifts started appearing on my doorstep, I knew it had gone too far. Flowers, chocolates, a book one had once mentioned at a local cafe. Then he started presenting these gifts in person, asking to hang out often. One evening he excitedly knocked on my door, holding a small box. He handed it to me, proud of himself. Inside were 2 dead frogs in a shoebox decorated in white. He called them Chris and Curtis, saying they were in love and he had to keep them together forever. I felt my insides boiling and forced a smile before running to the bathroom to get sick. He was a psychopath. Throughout this time, the telescope stayed pointed at my bedroom. When he showed up at my door one evening with a stuffed animal and a creepy smile, I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. I decided to play along, pretending to befriend him. I invited him over for coffee, knowing my brother would be in town that weekend. When he arrived, he tried to hug me, but I shook his hand and led him to the kitchen counter. We talked while we drank coffee. He told me I had the most beautiful bedroom and looked better up close. I knew he was referring to watching me through the telescope. I felt a shiver run down my spine and forced a polite thank you. It was getting late, and I told my brother to call me at exactly 6 p.m. to have an excuse to kick him out. At 10 minutes before 6, I realized I didn't know his name. He told me it was Joseph and said he enjoyed his time with me, Mia, before trying to hug me again. I shook his hand once more and sent him off. Hearing him say my name was sickening. This nightmare was becoming too much, but I was determined to stand up for myself. The next week, he invited me to his apartment to watch a movie. He chose Silence of the Lambs, an odd choice, but I went with it. During the movie, he kept looking at me, hoping I'd look back. I recognized the look men give it before they try to kiss you. I never returned his glances. Each time he invited me over, we'd watch a movie and order food, but he never let me into his room. He always kept the door firmly shut. One night, after a movie, I told him I needed to use the restroom and headed to his bedroom. He grabbed my arm tightly and twisted it. I jumped, terrified of what he might do next. He smiled and told me his toilet wasn't working, and maintenance would fix it soon. I quickly left, realizing I had let things get out of control. but I knew his room held the evidence I needed. One afternoon I went to his house with a plan. I brought a bottle of wine and we sat down to watch a movie. Joseph scooted closer, his thigh pressing against mine. He talked animatedly, and I nodded, acting engaged. His hand found its way to my knee and squeezed it. I stiffened but forced a laugh when he mentioned how alcohol made him feel more intimate. I excused myself to fetch more wine, discreetly slipping something into his glass. My heart pounded as I handed him the drink. Gradually, his speech slurred and his eyelids drooped. He mumbled about needing to lie down and leaned in, attempting to undress me. His movements were clumsy and desperate. Just as his intentions became clear, he slumped forward, unconscious. I eased him onto the couch and gathered my thoughts and courage. Taking a deep breath, I made my way to his bedroom door. It was always firmly shut when I visited, but now I had a chance. The door was locked, and I panicked, looking for a key. I checked the kitchen drawers and living room, then reached for his pocket, afraid he might wake up. I found his wallet, a vape, and gum. Inside the wallet was the key. Overcome with relief, I unlocked the bedroom door. The sight was worse than I imagined. The walls were covered in photos of me, taken through the telescope and in public. There were drawings, notes, and even some of my missing personal items. He had built a shrine to me. I took photos of everything and slipped out of his house. The next morning I went to the police with the evidence. They finally took me seriously. The photos were undeniable proof of his stalking and obsession. The officer who dismissed me before apologized. Detectives examined the evidence and prepared to arrest Joseph. He had charges pressed against him by his ex-girlfriend for stalking her. Joseph was arrested, and I felt relief. When asked how I got into his house, I explained our so-called friendship, how he would come over with gifts, and how I spent time with him to gain his trust. I even mentioned Chris and Curtis. The officers were shocked but understood. As they led Joseph out in handcuffs, he glanced at me, looking hurt and betrayed. I felt nothing but relief. I walked away from this situation with psychological scars and a deep fear of people. Over a year has passed, and although I've dealt with it, the mark he left was severe. I struggled with dating, quit my job, and moved a few states away. I lived in my car for a month until I found a new home and job. Life is bleak, and I still fear it might be him every time someone rings my doorbell. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison, followed by mandatory psychological treatment. At least I can take solace in that. My creepy neighbour pointed his telescope directly at my bedroom, and the police refused to take it seriously, so I took matters into my own hands. A few months ago, a man moved in across the street from me.